Good day, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danie, Laurel.
And I'm Delos Santos. Here are today's top stories. As widely expected, the Bangko Sentral raises interest rates by 3/4 of a point. This brings the benchmark interest rate to its highest in nearly 14 years.
President Bongbong Marcos finally meets with Chinese President Xi Jinping. These two leaders discuss certain regional issues during their bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the APEC Summit in Bangkok.
Consumers in Metro Manila will have to pay more for their water bills starting next year. The regulator in the region approves the rate hike sought by NCR's two main water concessionaires.
And the Energy Department says offshore wind projects could rake in up to $157.5 billion in investments. Let's begin our broadcast with the Bangko Sentral unleashing yet another jumbo rate hike that's in a bid to curb soaring inflation and to help prop up the peso. As widely expected, the Bangko Sentral raised its key interest rates by 75 basis points. This brings the overnight benchmark reverse repurchase rate to 5%, the highest in almost 14 years. Now, the move followed the U.S. Federal Reserve's decision earlier this month to raise rates by 3/4 of a point. This is the sixth time this year that the BSP has increased interest rates as inflation remains elevated. Bangko Sentral Governor Felipe Medalla said that in deciding to raise the policy rate once again, the Monetary Board noted that core inflation rose sharply in October, indicating stronger pass-through of elevated food and energy prices. Headline inflation accelerated to a near 14-year high of 7.7% in October, while core inflation quickened to 5.9%. That's from 5% in September. Now, with these figures, the BSP increased its inflation forecast to 5.8% this year from 5.6% previously.
Now, the much-anticipated meeting between President Bongbong Marcos and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping finally took place last night on the sidelines of the APEC Summit. Marcos's first bilateral meeting with the Chinese leader took place ahead of Marcos's scheduled state visit to China in January. The president was accompanied by Office of the Press Secretary OIC Cheloy Garafil, House Speaker Martin Romualdez, and former President and now House Deputy Speaker Gloria Arroyo, among others.
The bilateral meetings are really just a kind of getting to know you. And that was the same with our meeting.
President Marcos Jr. said he and the Chinese president had a, quote, pleasant exchange on certain regional issues. The palace said the two leaders agreed to boost ties, particularly in agriculture, energy, and infrastructure. Malacanang has yet to confirm if their meeting touched on the dispute at the South China Sea, but ahead of the talks, Marcos said this discussion may be inevitable.
We spoke a little bit about regional issues, but mostly about the plans that I have for the state visit that I will be undertaking to China in first week of January. But for now, it was a very pleasant exchange.
Now, aside from a bilateral meeting with the Chinese leader, President Bongbong Marcos also met with businessmen at the APEC CEO Summit. The president tackled food security in his first speech at the summit, calling on APEC member economies to come up with a solution to address the issue. Although he did not specifically name which countries, the president said the war between Russia and Ukraine has led to agricultural challenges around the world.
And the current conflict between two of the world's largest agricultural producers has led to a scarcity of grains and fertilizers felt painfully across the globe.
And also discussed rising inflation in the Philippines, which he says the government is mitigating with direct cash transfer payments. However, President Marcos says he hopes to generate more jobs for Filipinos so the country will not have to rely heavily on direct cash transfer payments.
Prices of fuel, prices of food has risen up to such an extent that they simply cannot afford to survive without assistance from the government. And hence, we are still presently in the Philippines providing just direct cash transfer payments. This is not something that we prefer to do, but it is the only way that we can mitigate the situation that our people have. So that is something that we are hoping with the creation of jobs and with the growth of the economy to slowly begin to dial down.
Now, circling back to the BSP rate hike, is the BSP going to mellow down in its next meetings, or will the hawkishness continue? Let's get insights from Luis Dumlao, Associate Professor and former Dean of the John Gokongwei School of Management. Prof. Luis, good day. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, good morning. Good to see you.
All right, again, you have the BSP following through on its forward guidance. What now? How will they act come December? Or do you see them at least still maintaining that matching stance with the Fed, at least, which is primarily expected to hike rates by at least 50 basis points?
Okay, I guess we can talk first about the nature of the inflation. These are three stages. Hopefully, it goes only to two stages. The first stage, of course, is the main source of inflation, which is the price of oil, which eventually created inflation in transport. The second stage is the pass-through. We are in the pass-through mode right now.
Okay.
For example, in the transport, although still in double digit, it's from 14.5% of not last month, it's down to 12.5%. But what is accelerating right now and causing inflation to go up is the pass-through. For example, in food and non-alcoholic beverages, it's gone up from 7.4 to 9.4%. And that's precisely why inflation has gone up. It's because of the pass-through, and precisely because food and non-alcoholic beverages has a bigger weight in the basket of goods. That's why inflation's gone up. Now, this is going to continue to pass through till December, and even to probably January. And we hope we don't get to the third stage, and the third stage is the inflation wage spiral. And what would our government, incidentally, the president has talked about it. The solution is to it's a targeted ayuda, so to speak, instead of raising the wages straightforward, because eventually, if you do that, it will create a third wage spiral. I think that's the one that's the key right now, more than the interest rates. Insofar as the interest rates are concerned, it's not really the exchange rate that they are targeting, trying to affect. It's the fact that the Fed raising interest rate that causes the depreciation of the peso that results into inflation. But eventually, it's just the inflation. It's just incidental that mechanically it passes through the exchange rate.
Okay.
But nonetheless, we started the year where the interest premium is around 1.9%, almost 2%. And today, before and right now, before the interest rate hike, before the matching, the interest rate premium between our interest rate in the United States interest has gone down to less than 0.5%, and because of the 75 basis points, it's back up to 1%. But still, that is less than, the premium is still less than, or the interest differential is still less than what it was at the beginning of the year.
Okay. Now, Prof, you mentioned that the BSP is forced essentially to hike rates to keep this differential at 1%. Have you seen any impact on inflation from the rate hikes that the BSP has done, even inflation expectations, because they just raised the forecast even next year? Why is there no impact on at least inflation expectations for next year, even with these higher rates?
It's precisely because we're still in the pass-through stage, and the pass-through stage is the inflation in transport is still greater than the inflation in food, particularly meat, fish, and vegetable. So it's passing through right now. but precisely because it has nothing to do with the pressure in interest rate per se, but precisely because the weight of fish, meat, and vegetable is bigger than the weight of transport and electricity. That's the one that's causing inflation to accelerate. But in terms of the main source of inflation, which is the price of oil, which is in transport and electricity, they have started to decelerate. Albeit it's still in in double digits, but it is starting to decelerate. The one that's are accelerating right now are in the food, again, in food, particularly meat, fish, and vegetable. And that's the source. It's the fact that these three have bigger weights in the basket of goods of our inflation. That's the one that's causing inflation to pick up.
Okay, but what's the likelihood, like what you mentioned earlier, as much as possible, let's try to avoid going to that final stage here, but what's the likelihood of us at least entering that particular phase? Especially now, you have, even in previous weeks, a number of groups already calling for increases in wages.
Again, we have two choices. We can have targeted ayuda, or we can raise wages across the board. And if you raise the wages across the board, that's the one that will cause the third stage, which is the spiraling inflation and wage. And that's what I think more than anything else, more than any policy, more than the interest rates, that's what we should be looking at. Do we do targeted subsidy, or do we do increase in general wages? And as long as you do targeted subsidy, we're still okay. And hopefully it doesn't hurt our public finance position. Of course, it's going to hurt. There's no free lunch, but for now, that's the thing that we are to look at.
Sir, how long is this pass-through going to be lasting? Because the commodity prices have gone down, oil prices at least stabilizing, no? And hopefully nga, BBM has pronounced fertilizer ayuda from China, maybe diversification of energy sources, I don't know. So is this pass-through effect something that we expect to wane at a certain point? And of course, just a general question, until where is the peak? Because they keep saying peak na, December peak. And then now it seems to be going further and further, with even the BSP raising the inflation outlook.
Let's just say that the first wave, which is the original source of oil, that will settle down in March.
Okay.
Which
Sir,
means
why
the
March?
pass-through will be over and above beyond March. Now, question is, how fast will the source of the increase in price of the oil settle down and go down? Again, these two are conflicting forces. So even if the pass-through continues beyond March, if the price of oil settle down so much as to offset the pass-through, then the general inflation will settle down right after March. But if the pass-through continues and the price of if the price of oil does not settle down as much as we want to, then the pass-through will outweigh the effect of the stabilization of the price of transport and electricity.
So, sir, why March? Why March?
Oh, because the prices of oil started to spike in March of this year. And for that reason, because of the base effect, the inflation on transport and electricity will settle down right around about March. Again, we keep in mind the war in Ukraine started in March.
But are you also considering at least the pressure coming, of course, from the weakness of the currency here when it comes to inflation?
It has to do with that also, but we keep in mind the central bank is not really targeting the exchange rate. It just so happens that the mechanism is that the interest rate affects the exchange rate, and the exchange rate affects the inflation. And the effect on inflation, that's the one that is on the eye of the central bank. It just so happens that it goes through the exchange rate mechanically.
Given that, when do you see at least the BSP unwinding here? Do you expect that at least by the latter half of next year?
Well, inflation. Inflation the past 3-4 months, the inflation in the United States was greater than ours. It's double digits. That's why in the United States they keep on raising the interest rate. But right now we're at par. It's both 7.7%. That means inflation in the United States is slowing down. That means the Fed raising interest rate, although they will probably slow down in a few months. And for that, again, if that being the case, the effect on that on the exchange rate and the eventual effect on the inflation will eventually die down. Again, that's based on so it's very, very different, many factors. It's it's the chain, and then the United States interest rates, and then the oil, and then within us there are 3 stages, which we it's the actual source, the pass through, and hopefully it doesn't happen the wage inflation spiral.
Sir, final question before we let you go. Are you impressed by, of course, the third quarter GDP print? And can you say with confidence that fundamentally the economy is growing at a pace fast enough that inflation is not necessarily as worrying?
Again, most people were surprised of the GDP growth of 7.6%. Maybe we are exception to the rule because we expected it to grow by 7.7%. In fact, we were outlier in that industry. And the reason why it's not 7.7 but 7.6, it's because the disappointment, if you can call it that, is in the construction. We expected it to grow 19%. It actually grew by only 12%. And as we all know, 12% is still double digit. So, and then of course you have the accommodation increasing by more than 40%. So it's the economy opening up, and then the transport and storage more 20%, and so on. So it's not surprising in that sense.
Okay. Is it good enough, sir?
Yes, it's good. Actually, yeah, it's good enough. Yeah.
All right. So a lot of insights there. Thank you so much. That was, of course, Professor Luis Dumlao, former dean of the John Gokongwei School of Management, Ateneo de Manila University.
Thanks for having me.
Let's pause for a quick break, but coming right up after that. Disney Plus officially launches in the Philippines.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
You're still watching Business World live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danie, Laurel.
Heads up Manila and Manila water consumers. The Metropolitan Waterworks and Sewerage System, or MWSS, has approved the implementation of higher water rates on a staggered basis that's starting January 2023. The rate rebasing adjustments for Manila Water and Maynilad will be implemented for 5 years or until 2027. By January, Manila Water will increase rates by 8 pesos and 4 centavos per cubic meter. This means consumers of 10 to 30 cubic meters will have to pay 193 to 866 pesos. That's from the current 151 to 679. The 2023 increase will be followed by a 5 peso hike in 2024, 3 pesos and 25 centavos in 2025, 3 pesos in 2026, and 1 peso and 8 centavos in 2027. Maynila, on the other hand, will be raising rates by 3 pesos and 29 centavos per cubic meter starting January. This means households consuming 10 to 30 cubic meters will see their monthly bills increase to 136 to 1,040 pesos from the current 130 to 997 pesos. For the succeeding years, Maynilad will implement a 6 peso and 26 centavo rate hike in 2024 and a 2 peso and 12 centavo hike in 2025. If there is no new water source, rates will rise by 84 centavos in 2026 and 80 centavos in 2027.
The Energy Department estimates offshore wind projects in its pipeline to require $157.5 billion in capital. Now, according to the Department of Energy, the cost is based on the rule of thumb cost estimate of about $5 million per megawatt for floating wind turbines. Now, Energy Secretary Rafael Otilla says the department is currently reviewing offshore wind policies for issuing future service contracts. This as the department has been receiving, quote, considerable interest in the potential of offshore wind from both local and foreign investors. Lotilla says the DOE is also drafting an order to streamline the process for applying to develop offshore wind projects.
The finance corner of Twitter sees the collapse of FTX as crypto's Lehman moment. However, former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers says FTX's story shares more themes with Enron. Scarlett Fu explains in this Bloomberg Quick Take.
Much of Twitter is comparing FTX to Lehman Brothers, the failed Wall Street bank that triggered the Great Recession.
A lot of people have compared this to Lehman. I would compare it to Enron.
That's Larry Summers, former president of Harvard University and Treasury Secretary under Bill Clinton. He sees a lot of similarities.
The smartest guys in the room, not just financial error, but certainly from the reports, whiffs of fraud, stadium namings very early in a company's history, vast explosion of wealth that nobody quite understands where it comes from.
Enron founder Kenneth Lay and COO Jeff Skilling were out front in turning an old-school energy company into a 21st century energy trading powerhouse. FTX founder Sam Bankman-Fried is an MIT graduate who made $1 billion before the age of 30. Enron played fast and loose with financial accounting rules, using dozens of shell companies to hide losses. We still don't know the full extent of what happened at FTX, but its organizational structure couldn't have been better designed to confuse everybody. FTX is now the subject of both civil and criminal investigations by the U.S. government. And just one more similarity. Now that FTX has declared bankruptcy, a restructuring expert is stepping in, and it's the same guy who managed the liquidation of Enron.
The country is seeing the completion of an average of 543,000 square meters of office space in the next 4 years. Colliers said in a report that office completion would return to the time before the entry of Philippine offshore gaming operators, or POGOs. This year, Colliers projects the completion of nearly 809,000 square meters of office spaces which they predict would increase office vacancy to 18.2% by year-end, and that's from 17.7%.
The magic has arrived in time for the holiday season as Disney Plus officially launches in the Philippines. Disney marked the launch of its streaming service here in the country with an event last night. Filipino viewers can finally access thousands of hours of movies and shows from Disney's iconic brands. That includes Pixar, Marvel, Star Wars, and National Geographic. Now, those who plan on binging Disney Plus content can get a monthly mobile subscription that's 159 pesos or an annual mobile plan for 1,150 pesos. A premium subscription, meanwhile, will cost 369 pesos per month or 2,950 pesos annually.
Already started watching last night.
Star Wars.
One of.
Haven't seen it. Okay.
Those are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate front today. I'm Jess Delos Santos.
And I'm Danie Laurel. We are One News, all sides, all the time. But don't go away. We'll give you the latest on the local bourse when Businessworld Live returns. Stay with us.
And you're still watching Business World Live here in One News. Okay, market euphoria. That's what analysts are calling this whole rally across the region. But does it have legs?
Well, as of today, no, Jess, because you can see that after, we had a lot of positivity during the week, at least for Asia Pacific, when China, or at least the speculation is that China will stop this COVID-0 policy. Analysts like Eugenia Victorino of SEB is saying that these oversized rate hikes in the US will see some correction in the future. So not too fast there, but you can see, a bit of a mixed picture here, at least from our own index. We're still enjoying that bump up, Jess. I mean, 6,400. Are we going back to 6,500? Some have predicted that by the year end, especially with the Christmas rally, as they like to call it. But nevertheless, up 0.6% already on the morning, especially on the back of the delivery of that 75 basis point rate hike. So again, 1% differential there, matching the US Fed. It's now at 5%. Now let's take a quick peek at those sectors that usually get affected by the rate hike. Properties, nevertheless, are still up, despite the fact that usually with a rate hike, that has an impact on the sector. Nevertheless, this was of course expected. Another one to look out for is the banks. Let's see, that is also in the green. So again, it seems to be across the board gains here, up by 1 2/10%. And finally, I just wanted to take a quick peek at the peso. That is, of course, trading at weaker than before, but still quite strong compared to what we've seen in recent months. Just we were trading at 57.43 to the greenback.
Okay, let's see if that Christmas rally is going to happen this year. And that's it for today, November 18, 2022. Join us again Monday next week at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danie Laurel. Stay safe, Philippines. We are One News, all sides, all the time.